You're listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast, where you'll learn about every Jewish topic imaginable in about 10 minutes. Today's topic is displaced persons camps and the Exodus. We'll encounter German place names, Hebrew phrases, British officials, and enough unfamiliar pronunciations to remind everyone that my voice was assembled by engineers rather than language professors. If I accidentally give a German town a Hebrew accent, please accept my sincere, artificial apology. The history, fortunately, remains completely authentic. Our story begins not with victory celebrations at the end of World War II, but with a shocking realization. Liberation did not instantly bring freedom, homes, families, or hope. For hundreds of thousands of Jewish survivors, the hardest chapter was not yet finished. When Allied armies liberated Nazi concentration camps in 1945, many people imagined survivors would simply pack their belongings, return home, and begin rebuilding their lives. That assumption proved painfully unrealistic. Entire Jewish communities had been destroyed. Parents, spouses, children, siblings, neighbors, and friends had disappeared forever. Homes had been confiscated or occupied by others. Businesses no longer existed. In several Eastern European countries, returning Jews even faced renewed anti-Semitic violence. For countless survivors, there was literally nowhere safe to return. Instead of going home, they entered camps administered by the Allied powers. These became known as Displaced Persons camps, usually shortened to DP camps, temporary communities that unexpectedly remained open for several years after the war officially ended. The phrase Displaced Persons camp sounds almost harmless, as though someone merely misplaced a suitcase at the airport. The reality was far more complicated. Many camps occupied former military bases, prisoner of war facilities, or even former concentration camps adapted for civilian use. Conditions varied widely. Food and medical care gradually improved, but overcrowding remained common, and emotional trauma was everywhere. Survivors carried unimaginable grief while struggling to determine whether any relatives had also survived. Yet amid this devastation, remarkable resilience appeared. Schools reopened, synagogues resumed services, newspapers were published, theater groups performed, weddings filled community halls. Babies were born in surprisingly large numbers. Life, against every expectation, stubbornly refused to surrender completely to the horrors that had preceded it. One of the most influential visitors to the DP camps was Earl Harrison, an American lawyer sent by President Harry Truman to investigate conditions. Harrison's report strongly criticized Allied policies, arguing that Jewish survivors were often being treated little differently than they had been under imprisonment, except that the guards no longer wore Nazi uniforms. He urged that Jewish displaced persons receive better treatment and recommended allowing large-scale immigration to Palestine. His findings attracted international attention and increased pressure upon governments already struggling with post-war reconstruction. The report helped many people understand that liberation represented only the beginning of recovery. Freedom without a destination, without family, and without a future remained an incomplete victory for those who had survived history's greatest catastrophe. As hope slowly returned, many survivors reached the same conclusion. They did not simply want another temporary shelter. They wanted a permanent home where Jews could determine their own future. For increasing numbers, that meant Palestine. A movement called Briha, meaning escape, organized routes that secretly guided Jewish survivors across Europe toward ports on the Mediterranean. Volunteers forged documents, bribed officials, arranged transportation, and coordinated an enormous underground migration. The operation resembled an elaborate detective novel, except every passport, truck ride, and border crossing involved real people desperate for another chance at life. Their destination was Palestine, but Britain's immigration restrictions under the White Paper of 1939 meant that reaching it legally had become extraordinarily difficult for most refugees. Because legal immigration certificates were scarce, Zionist organizations developed Aliyah Bet, the effort to transport Jewish refugees into Palestine without British permission. Old cargo ships, riverboats, and aging passenger vessels were purchased wherever possible. Many were hardly seaworthy. Cabins designed for a handful of passengers suddenly held dozens. Food, water, and sanitation were limited. But people willingly accepted those hardships because the alternative often meant remaining indefinitely inside European camps. Volunteers crewed the vessels despite knowing the British Royal Navy actively patrolled the Mediterranean. Their mission was simple in theory and incredibly difficult in practice: deliver Holocaust survivors safely to Palestine before British authorities intercepted them. Every successful voyage represented hundreds of people beginning entirely new lives after surviving extraordinary loss and suffering. Among all these refugee ships, one would become the most famous of them all. Originally built as an American river steamer, it was eventually renamed the Exodus 1947. More than 4,500 Jewish refugees crowded aboard, most of them Holocaust survivors who had spent months or years in displaced persons camps, waiting for an opportunity to reach Palestine. The ship itself was overcrowded, aging, and poorly equipped for such a journey. Yet its passengers willingly accepted those conditions because they believed they were finally sailing toward freedom. They could not know that their voyage would become one of the defining humanitarian stories of the 20th century, attracting worldwide attention and permanently changing international attitudes toward Britain's Palestine policy. As the Exodus approached the coast of Palestine in July 1947, British naval vessels surrounded it and ordered the ship to stop. The refugees refused to surrender peacefully, hoping they might still reach shore. British forces boarded the vessel, and a violent struggle followed. Several passengers and crew members were killed, while many others were injured before the British gained control. The confrontation immediately attracted international attention because journalists had followed the voyage from its beginning. Photographs showed exhausted Holocaust survivors being removed from the very ship they believed would finally carry them to safety. Instead of quietly enforcing immigration policy, Britain suddenly found itself defending its actions before an increasingly sympathetic and deeply troubled world audience watching closely. Normally, intercepted immigrants were transported to detention camps on Cyprus, while officials decided their fate. This time, however, Britain made a very different decision. The passengers aboard the Exodus were transferred to other ships and sent back to Europe. Many observers assumed they would simply be taken to France and allowed to disembark there. Instead, when the refugees refused to leave voluntarily, the British continued sailing. Eventually, the ships arrived in the British occupation zone of Germany. Think about how astonishing that appeared. Holocaust survivors who had survived Nazi persecution were now being returned to German soil against their wishes, only 2 years after the war had ended. The images shocked newspapers and readers throughout the world. The return to Germany became a public relations disaster for Britain. Newspapers across Europe and North America published photographs of weary Jewish refugees behind fences once again. Although these camps differed completely from Nazi concentration camps, the symbolism proved impossible to escape. The world saw people who had endured history's greatest genocide still unable to find a permanent refuge. Political leaders who had previously viewed Palestine primarily as a diplomatic problem increasingly recognized its humanitarian dimension. Public opinion shifted noticeably in favor of allowing more Jewish immigration and finding a lasting solution. The Exodus itself carried no military victory, captured no territory, and overpowered no government. Yet it succeeded spectacularly in changing hearts, minds, and international conversations about Jewish refugees after the Holocaust. Meanwhile, life continued inside the displaced persons camps. They gradually evolved into surprisingly vibrant communities despite their temporary purpose. Children attended schools, vocational programs prepared adults for new careers, newspapers reported local events, and cultural organizations staged concerts, lectures, and theatrical performances. Religious life flourished as synagogues reopened and holidays were celebrated together. Thousands of marriages took place, and many babies were born, earning affectionate descriptions as symbols of Jewish renewal after unimaginable destruction. Survivors searched tirelessly for missing relatives through bulletin boards, radio broadcasts, and aid organizations. Every reunion brought overwhelming joy. Every unsuccessful search brought renewed grief. The camps became places where mourning and rebuilding existed side by side, reminding everyone that recovery rarely follows a straight or predictable path. As Israel declared independence in May 1948, opportunities for immigration expanded dramatically. Hundreds of thousands of Holocaust survivors and other Jewish refugees soon arrived in the new state, helping shape its early population and national identity. Over the next several years, the remaining displaced persons camps gradually closed as residents emigrated to Israel, the United States, Canada, Australia, Latin America, and other countries willing to receive them. For most survivors, leaving the camps represented the true ending of the Holocaust era. Liberation had occurred years earlier, but permanent homes, citizenship, employment, and family life finally offered the stability they had long sought. The camps disappeared, yet the experiences shared there continued influencing Jewish communities and individual lives for generations afterward around the world. The story of the displaced persons camps and the Exodus also reminds us that history does not end neatly when wars conclude. Victory on the battlefield cannot instantly restore murdered families, stolen homes, shattered communities, or lost childhoods. Governments faced difficult decisions. Humanitarian organizations worked tirelessly, and survivors displayed astonishing resilience under circumstances few of us can imagine. The Exodus became famous because it placed human faces upon complicated political debates. Instead of discussing immigration quotas or diplomatic agreements, the world suddenly confronted thousands of ordinary people asking a simple question. After everything that had happened, where were the Jewish survivors supposed to go? Sometimes a single question changes history more effectively than an entire shelf of government reports. Next time, we'll continue exploring another remarkable chapter in Jewish history, following the people and events that transformed centuries of hope into the reality of a modern Jewish state. The journey from the displaced persons camps to Israel was neither quick nor easy, but it demonstrated extraordinary perseverance in the face of overwhelming loss. Survivors who had been stripped of nearly everything rebuilt families, communities, schools, businesses, and futures that many believed impossible only a few years earlier. Thanks for listening to Everything Jewish, 10 minutes at a time. Until next time, may we remember not only how people suffered, but also how courage, determination, and hope helped them rebuild lives that refused to be defined solely by tragedy.